Jim Irsay's passing at 65 years old. Very, very sad. And I think the best way to really kind of encapsulate, and I've thought a lot about this over the last, 6 days since the news broke. I think the best way to encapsulate the accomplishments of Jim Irsay, because he had his demons, admittedly, and he went through a lot personally. And, like he had his ups and downs from a team standpoint as well. When I think about the legacy of Jim Irsay, I think about something that is very, very difficult to do. He changed the perception of his last name. He changed how people thought when they heard the name Irsay. And that is pretty incredible. His father, of course, well documented, was abusive, was an alcoholic, was very, very difficult to work with. Didn't do a lot in the community, and probably was best known for loading up the Colts onto those trucks in 1984 in Baltimore in the dead of night, onto the Mayflower trucks and moving them to Indianapolis. I don't think that there could have been a more detested owner than Bob Irsay. And so for Jim to come in and completely flip the perception of his last name and completely flip what people think of when they think of the Irsay name. And, it was interesting talking to the Colts COO, Pete Ward, last week, who was as close with Irsay as anyone, who was really his right-hand man, and who, had actually first gotten to know Irsay when they were both starting with the team in 1982 in Baltimore. They became close when the team moved in 1984 to Indianapolis. Like Pete was very much in on the idea, like, hey, Jim wanted to atone for a lot of the mistakes his father made and wanted to make up for a lot of the things that went wrong with the Colts before he got the team. And, there's obvious accomplishments. I think, he meant a ton to the city of Indianapolis, and, that's become kind of one of our sports capitals now. And a lot of the work that Jim Irsay and his front office did in putting together New England or Indianapolis as this sports capital was a huge part of that. Getting Lucas Oil Stadium built, they get a Super Bowl there. All of us in our business, we go there every year for the combine. Final Fours there. The Jim Irsay, big part of his legacy is making the Colts the Indianapolis Colts. Like my dad, when I was a kid growing up, used to refer to the Colts as Baltimore. Couldn't stop that habit. I don't think anybody does that anymore. He really kind of created the image of the Indianapolis Colts as their own entity, as not an extension of the Baltimore Colts. And they won a ton. They won a ton. They went to 2 Super Bowls, won one. They were a constant contender over about a 20-year period, first with Peyton Manning and then with Andrew Luck. Hit some hard times more recently, but I don't think you'd ever question Jim Irsay's ability to put together a winning organization based on what they were able to accomplish over that 20-year period. But as much as anything else, I think the person he was is really what everybody's going to remember. Like the people who worked for him, obviously his family, his players, his coaches, his front office people. No one had a bad word to say. I talked to people who he fired over the last 4 or 5 days who love him. And, I think maybe the most poignant stories, though, are the ones that come up about how much he gave and how there were little things that he did. And one story I got, this will be in a story that's up on the website today. One story I got was from was Pete Ward passed this along, was from a family that had an 11-year-old that suffered a traumatic brain injury playing football. And Jim Irsay had heard the story and just like felt horrible, was heartbroken, and sent the family $20,000. And like just nothing, no cameras, no newspaper stories, no fanfare whatsoever. Just out of the goodness of his heart, wanted to do some good, gave the family $20,000. There are a ton of stories like that. That is not an isolated incident. And that family told Pete that like when they told their son that Jim had passed last week, he got teary-eyed and emotional. And I think there are a ton of stories like that really are the legacy for Jim Irsay, or the difference that he made in the community, the difference he made for individual people. Pete told me this story from way back when they were talking about, how when I get the team, Jim was talking to Pete about when I get the team, it's going to be different. And they mentioned how, and Jim had mentioned to Pete, and music was such a big part of his life, how he had heard this story about Frank Sinatra, and how Frank Sinatra and his assistant would go through the newspaper and look for people who needed help and then give them that help. And Jim Irsay said that was what he wanted to do when he became the owner, and certainly did that. All the best to Jim Irsay's family. Again, just for all his flaws, for his demons, just by all accounts, a wonderful person who did a lot of good in the world and leaves a great legacy. And yeah, so hopefully those who are close to him, his friends, his family, can find peace in his memory.